Welcome CSE 121 class to exercise 3 address. We're going to be reviewing output and input. And what we're going to do first is just check your consoles. Make sure you close out of any consoles. I could have even opened a console of yours when I was checking your assignments, when I was printing out things or outputting things. So make sure these are closed and then go to your files. And I'm going to go into my CSE 121 directory. Hopefully you have that. And I'm going to make a new file called 3-address. Now, make sure you put the py on there. If you make it without the py, it's just going to be like a text file. You won't see any color coding. But with .py on there, you'll have your color coding when you make the file. So make sure you do that. And I always keep everything lowercase. I saw some files that people created that were uppercase. I try to keep everything lowercase. That way I'll never mess that up. So I'm going to hit New File, and it'll open up in my code editor. And I'm just going to put some variables in here for an address. We're going to make a 3-line address just like it would be in a label. It'll have your name, it'll have your street address, and then it'll have city, state, and zip. And that's all we're going to do is we're going to output that a couple times with some different methods, and then we're going to use input. That's going to be part of this. Part 2 of this is we're going to introduce input. But let's get some variables first, and I'm going to do them as separate data, meaning I want a variable for first name, a variable for last name, a variable for street address, anything that would be separate. I know we write them all together when we do that, but in a database, they'd all be separate. So let's set them up separate. And I'm just going to make them empty right now when I create them. So I'm going to assign them to like an empty string to start, and then we'll fill them in. Okay, you might be asking, why did I put zip C? Why not just zip? Because I did see zip appear as a reserved word at some point, because there is a zip thing that you can do in Python, particularly when with command line. So I wasn't sure if we could use zip or not, but we probably won't have a problem, but I'm just going to put a C there just to do that. And also notice I put street address because I didn't just want to put address because the whole thing's address. I'm trying to be as specific as possible. That's why I put F name and L name for first name and last name. So those are my variables. Now I don't have them filled out yet, or I don't have them assigned to anything other than an empty string. That's what this is, an empty string. When you have this, that's a space. And when you have nothing, it's an empty string. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 3 lines for print output, and we're going to start off with the comma method. So I'm going to put a space here, and I'm just going to say print 3-line address, and I have to make sure I put my pound sign in front of it so it's a comment. And I'm just going to put 3 print statements. Now before we print anything out, I want to put some values in here so we could print them out. And I'm just going to use my web alias Steve and my last name Smith, so no one knows who I am. And I'll just make a very generic address here, 123 Main Street. I'm not going to type in Boulevard or something that's going to be hard to spell, although street seems to be giving me a problem here. And I'll make a short city name, so I'll just say Dover, and I'll put New Jersey. I'm actually going to put lowercase, just because we're going to use a method to convert it to uppercase, and that'll be helpful, especially when we use input. And for zip code, I don't know the zip code of Dover, New Jersey, so I'm just going to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because there should be 5 numbers, but it's 08 something probably, so I don't know what it is. And now we have our print statements down here. Now, if we would save this and run it, let me just save it. If we'd run it, we'd have nothing except some space at the bottom because there's nothing inside here. Now keep in mind, print statements, they have an invisible character inside. They print out a new line statement. So whenever you print something out, it's going to print out print statements on a separate line because that's built in. It won't put them all side by side. So we're going to put our variables in here, and we're going to use the comma method, which is simple to start. So I'm just going to put F name, L name, and put a comma in between. Now I don't need a space here. It will put a space when it outputs, but I don't need to put one here after the comma. This isn't an English sentence, so the white space in there doesn't matter. And I don't have to put anything here. It's just going to print out the variable. And remember, if this isn't a number, if you put letters in here, it's always going to be looking for a variable. So if I didn't have this, if I spelled it wrong, it's going to look for that variable. And if I don't have it, it's going to give me like an undefined because it won't be able to find it. If I go down here, we're going to do 3 things. We're going to do city, comma, state, comma, and then zip C. And we don't need a comma at the end. So let me save that. Let's see what happens with my error. Now I should get an error here right away. It's saying undefined. And that's not necessarily syntax. That's more, I guess, of a runtime. So let's just see what happens. Let's see if it runs anything. Let's see if it runs that. That way we know if it's a syntax error or a runtime error. So let's run it. So it printed Steve Smith. So this is a runtime error because usually when you see something like name error, that usually indicates it's a runtime error. Plus, it outputs Steve Smith. So it wasn't a syntax error. It started to actually run it, but then when it got to this line, it looked for the variable and it didn't find it. So that's a runtime error right there. and we're going to fix it because I just have to put an S in here, and I'm going to save it. And now we fixed our runtime error. So let's run it again, and there it is. Pretty exciting. Look at that. 3-line address. Now, another exciting thing we could do is make this capital letters without just going in here and typing capital N and J. And one way we could do that is go to W3 Schools, a great quick resource for finding a lot of things, about HTML, CSS, a lot of web things. Now they have Python, SQL. We use this for all kinds of stuff. It's a great resource, especially when you want to find things quick. And what I'm going to do here is go into Python strings and look for something that we can convert things to uppercase. Now, if you scroll down here, we're going to find it, but keep in mind there's all kinds of methods that work with strings. Length, here's string methods, and they're going to show lowercase, upper. There it is right there. And I'm going to go down further because I want to show you that there's more resources down as you go down the page. We're going to talk about these. These are escape characters. Here's the \n for a new line. I told you that one's already invisible inside of a print statement or print function, and we're going to use that a little bit later. And I'm going to go down here to string methods, and they have capitalized, except it converts the first character to uppercase. So that would be for a lot of text. You know, if they were sentence text. We're going to look for one called upper, and it's in alphabetical order, so I have to scroll down, and there's upper. Converts a string, everything into uppercase. So if it's a state, everything will be uppercase. So let's just see how this works. Click on this, and this is a method, so it's not a function. It's not like the print function where you put something inside the parentheses. This actually uses the variable dot, because it's using that text, and it's using that text dot upper. So a method usually looks like this. A method is usually associated with a class, some kind of class, and then this is a string class that it's associated with. So it's using text dot upper. It's using the variable dot upper to do that. So when you work with turtles and stuff like that, you'll see this something dot whatever when you're seeing methods. So that's one difference you'll see between a function and a method, is that typically you'll see this dot syntax when you use methods because it's associated with a class, and in this case it's associated with a string. I don't think you can do upper with everything. It only works with strings. So I'm going to go back here, and I'm just going to reassign state. I'm just going to say state. Now I can call it cap state or something, or I could just reassign the same name and put state equals state dot upper and then the empty parentheses. So that's the way the method works. It's using the upper method on state. So it's state dot upper, and it should convert that to capital NJ. And that's all we should do. So the new variable after it's reassigned is state. So I'm going to save that, and I'm going to run it. And look at that. It's pretty exciting. Capital NJ. That's pretty exciting stuff right there. All right, one other thing we're going to do here before we start moving on to input is we're going to print this out using another method, Fstring method, which is a nice method. And I'm going to put 2 spaces here, and I'm going to copy these things. And this is going to be 3-line address with Fstring method. And if you remember the Fstring method, you're using strings instead of just variables here, and you're putting your variables inside of curly braces. Now, to do that, it's a little harder. In some IDEs, you can highlight a word and just put the left curly brace, and it'll put it around it. It'll wrap it around it, and you can do that with quotes too. CodePen and Replit and different things will do that. This does not, which is just one downside of it. So that means I have to put my curly braces manually around them, which is a little more work. And before I do the next ones, remember, if you're using the Fstring method, because it's string, we have to put quotes around the whole thing. It's treating the whole thing as a string. That's why it's called the Fstring method. And then there's the F, so we have to put the F there. The F is like the little key that tells us that things inside of curly braces, or the data inside of curly braces, are variables, and it knows to look up variables that are up here. So that's the way an Fstring works, and we did that before. Now we don't need the comma here because right now the comma would output because it's part of a string. So that would output as a comma, and I don't want first name, comma, last name. Actually, what I want is a space. So you can put a space in here, whereas here we're limited because that always puts a space, and we can't really take away that space when we do that. You know, if we wanted to put a comma here, this thing was a problem if we tried to put a comma in here, and I'll show you that in a second. Also, what I'll do is I'll put my curly brace around here, and my F means nothing right now until I put my quotes around this thing. So I'm putting them in my F, and I'm putting my quotes. F string. So string, make sure you put quotes. F, make sure you put the F outside of that. Now these I have to put separate braces around everything. Make sure it's not highlighted, and put the closing, and then I'm going to put my start quote here, my end quote here, and I'm going to put my F, and then we're going to get rid of the commas. Now if you want spaces in here, you could go in here and put a space between here and a space here. One thing I don't think I showed yet, unless I forgot, I have to admit, it crashed one time when I was recording the first time, so I'm doing it all over. One thing in here, if you didn't want space in this thing here, if you wanted a comma in there, you would actually have to go in here and put a quote and then a comma, because you'd have to insert a string within these variables, and then you'd have to put another comma. For one thing, it's just confusing to look at. Another thing is that when you output this, and let me save it and output it, and they're all jammed together, but you can see what it does here. It puts a space before the comma. So whenever you have this comma method, it's always putting spaces in there, and it's hard to take them out. You could take them all out, but it's hard to take one out. And then also what we're going to do is put a space between these two addresses, because they're getting all jammed together. And the way you can do that is you could just put a print function without anything in it. It'll have that invisible new line character in there, which will put a space in between there. And you could put more than one in there. Now, let me get rid of this thing, because I don't want that extra comma in there, and I don't want an extra space. So I'll just leave it the way it is. So let me save it, and let me run it out. And that's what we want it to look like. That looks nice, and that looks nice. Actually, they're exactly the same right now. And you might say, well, that seemed easier. It is, but you're a little flexible here. So let's say you wanted to put a comma in here. After city, you can. Just put it there. It's a string. Comma's part of a string. You could put it in there. And let's say you wanted 2 spaces here between state and zip. No problem. Just hit the space bar, and there it is. This is good stuff here. And I'll save it, and I'll run it so it outputs. And there it is. Now I have my comma, space, and now I have 2 spaces there. If I wanted more space between these things, I could put another print statement. Also, one thing just to point out, because this will be your little challenge you're going to do, here's escape characters. This /n, which is a new line, if you use this, it's actually treated as a string, because notice we're in the Python string section. So when you go back here, you can put it right in a string. So if you went here and you said, I want to put a new line character in here, and you want /n, and you just stuck it in there. Now it shows up blue to indicate that it's not a real n. This escape character, you can put different characters in here, and we'll talk about them later. So if you needed double quotes, or if you needed quotes inside of quotes, you could use these escape characters. And I'll just save this, and I'll just show you what it does. And you can see what that did. Steve Smith, that line break character, or the new line character, actually put right within a string, actually broke it and put it on a separate line. Now, I don't want that. I don't want Steve Smith on a separate line, but it's helpful to know to do that. So that's part of your challenge coming up right now. And then we're going to move on and do input as part of part 2 of this video. What you're going to do here, and I'm not going to do it for you, you're actually going to do it. So let me create some space here. You're going to copy these 2 lines here. As long as you got this working, you can copy these 2 lines. And you're going to print a 3-line address with 1 print statement. And you're going to do that using the new line character. That means you're going to put a bunch of these variables in 1 print statement. So I think you should know how to do that. You guys are problem solvers. So with 1 print statement, and even if you wanted to put space, I don't want you to use this either. So actually, that's kind of a hint. But since you can break a line, you can break a line even before this stuff happens, so it separates this 3-line address from that 3-line address. So what I'm going to want to see in the end is basically 3 3-line addresses. You won't have Steve Smith on a separate line. You'll have 3 3-line addresses with a space in between, and you're going to be using the 3 methods. You'll be using the comma method, the Fstring method, and then this one will just have 1 print statement, and you're just going to use line breaks or the new line character within the string to actually do that. So you could break them up and just have 1 print statement to do that. So you're going to do that as your challenge, so I'm not even going to show you how to do that. But this will end part 1, and when I come back with part 2, what we're going to do is we're going to use input, so we can use the input function and input stuff in here instead of just printing out Steve Smith all the time. We can print out other people. That'll be really exciting when we print out other names and other addresses. So look forward to that in part 2 of our 3 address exercise.